So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this STARS webinar session. I'm Tony Schönenberger. I'm the Executive Chairman of STARS. STARS is a platform for dialogue to discuss developments which will impact the society as a whole and our businesses in the next couple of years. Today, we actually have the privilege to talk to Durgalakshmi SATHIAKUMAR. Durga, it's great to have you on this webinar session. Durga is the Group Chief Operating Officer of Shiok Meats, the world's first cultivated crustacean meat company and Southeast Asia's first cultivated seafood company. No doubt, we are witnessing a kind of a revolution in the food sector with actually a lot of innovations such as plant-based meat, cultured meat, cultivated fish, etc. So Durga, we are very much looking forward to your insights. I'd like to introduce you now to our moderator of this session. It's Tom LUDESCHER. Tom is an entrepreneur based in Singapore, and he is also co-president of the STARS Singapore Alumni Chapter. Thank you very much, Tom. We are looking very much forward to this session. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for this kind of introduction. Good morning to Europe. Good afternoon to Asia. A warm welcome to all STARS alumni and participants of this webinar. My name is Tom LUDESCHER. I'm the co-chair of the STARS Singapore Alumni Chapter, and I have here with me today Durgalakshmi SATHIAKUMAR, Group Chief Operating Officer of Shiok Meats. In this webinar, we will talk about Shiok Meats as the pioneer in developing cultivated crustaceans and building a future-proof food system. Welcome, Durga. It's great to have you here today for this webinar. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Tom.
All participants of this webinar will have the opportunity to ask questions to Durga, so please use the chat functions and we will get back to your questions later during the course of this webinar. Thank you. It's exactly 2 years ago that Singapore Food Agency approved the first cell-based meat in December 2020. Singapore was the first country in the world doing so, making cell-based meat part of its ambitious 30 by 30 initiative with the objective to locally produce 30% of its food supply by the year 2030. Cell-based meat has been in the news ever since, so we could read almost every week about either new companies entering that space or new type of cells being developed for different type of products. And very, very interestingly, now this has also arrived with seafood and particularly with crustaceans, where Shiok Meats is the first company entering this very innovative space. So Durga, can you tell us a bit more about cultivated meat in general, and of course the technology that is behind this?
Great. Thanks, Tom and Tony, for the kind introduction. To go about cultivated technology is one of the novel technologies that has been developed to address one of the biggest global challenges in food and agriculture, including the damages to the environment, problems that are associated with antibiotic resistance, food security, and specifically in the case of seafood, the ecological damage and the problems due to overfishing. So to break down, cultivated meat involves the use of stem cells, which are the building blocks to the muscle and fat tissues that we have in conventional meats. So they are genuine animal meats because they're made of the same cell types that you see in the animal tissue, and therefore they are able to replicate your nutrition and sensory profile. Let me explain with a simple analogy to you, like how you grow fruits and vegetables. So you start off taking a plant cutting, and then you place them in a nutrient-rich environment. Similarly, what we do is isolate stem cells from crustaceans, which is nothing but shrimp, crab, lobster, and you place them in a nutrient-rich environment. So once the cells grow, you place them into a larger vessels, which are called bioreactors. And I would describe growing the cells in the bioreactor as providing them like a spa package. So you provide them nutrients, temperature, pH, and all of that, and they grow into the meat portion that we consume. This can be harvested, and what you can incorporate it into a number of your favorite dishes, like shrimp dumplings, lobster gazpacho, the Singapore famous chili crab. And that's what we do.
It's very insightful and visual to understand how do those cells grow. Can you tell us a little bit more how Shiok Meats applies this technology, and particularly what differentiates Shiok Meats from other companies in this field, and particularly the way how you have entered now the crustaceans, which I understand is the first time, so no one else has done it before. Can you share some insights from this journey?
Sure. I think, as you told, we are the first cultivated seafood and meat company in Southeast Asia, and the first cultivated crustacean company globally. And if you're wondering what the word Shiok means, it's about fantastic or delicious in Singapore and Malay slang. So what we do is work on seafoods like shrimp, crab, lobster, and crayfish. And we were founded in the year 2018 because we believed sustainable solution is the need of the hour to address the problems associated with the growing population and to feed the protein demand of the growing population without causing additional pressures on your ocean health. And that was the main mission and vision of the organization. And when we were founded in the year 2018, there's not many companies who were actually looking into cultivated sector or the alternate protein sector, being Asia is one of the largest exporters, producers, consumers of the seafood. And I think from a technology standpoint, this industry drives a lot of inspiration from biomedical engineering, where there's a lot of extensive research which is done on mammals. But when as we come to seafood, which are down the line in evolution when compared to mammals, there's not much of literature, protocols in about how do you isolate these stem cells from a shrimp? Where do you get them? What do you feed them so that they grow into the muscle and fat that you require? So all of this technology was built in-house, and we filed our patents for this technology. And another important milestone for us in this journey is building our mini R&D plant, which is a stepping stone towards our manufacturing plant. So this is the first of its kind, a state-of-art facility that's built for crustacean technology. So using this as a blueprint, we would be going into the manufacturing across the different parts of the globe.
Good. So that's the first step already in the scaling
yes.
Of the facility. And it's really interesting that the mammals are not applicable to the crustaceans, and actually it has a lot to do with evolution, if I understand it correctly,
yeah.
and also understanding how have those cells evolved over time, and then today, how can you use those insights to replicate them into food for feeding the world. Let's talk a bit about the environmental aspects. Could you elaborate on the current impact of the crustacean production system, and how the cultivated technology that you are now working on can make the world more sustainable from a seafood perspective and seafood production perspective?
Sure, that's an important question that we should address. And I think the current crustacean industry has relatively very high environmental impact, especially when you take into account the land, the water, and the carbon footprint. Do you know how much the carbon footprint for eating a kilogram of shrimp?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, we all think about amongst the meats that we eat, beef is the highest carbon emission. But actually, shrimp, which is grown on a mangrove converted land, emits about more than 1,600 kilograms of carbon emissions.
Per kg.
Per kg.
Wow, that's massive.
You can think about, which is almost equivalent to a flight from Singapore to Paris. That's the carbon emission of eating a shrimp, a kilogram of shrimp. Similarly, if you look into the amount of land that is required, it's about 1 to 6 football fields.
For 1 kilogram.
For a ton of shrimp here.
For 1 ton of shrimp.
And in terms of water, it's more than half of an Olympic swimming pool.
It's a lot.
So, and that's the reason why we address this market. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with crustaceans alone occupying more than 147 billion. And we believe that through this technology, we would be able to reduce the environmental impact of crustacean production, but at the same time produce delicious, healthy meats for the population and to meet the growing protein demand. And since a lot of these cultivated companies are into the R&D and more into the scale up, there's no specific numbers, but a recent study done by CE Delft has clearly shown that cultivated technology would be able to produce meat and seafood definitely lower than the conventional production, 70 to 90% lower.
70 to 90% lower, so that's substantial.
And if you use renewable, it's going to be even more, lesser than what we've been using.
Okay, good. So your technology actually helps to preserve land, to preserve water, to preserve
carbon emissions,
energy. So what's stopping you?
I think in terms of, there are risks and challenges when you address novel technology.
Yes.
So to start off with, there are a few pillars that I would like to describe in terms of challenges. As I told you, there's driving a lot from the biomedical industry. It's more effort is done on mammals. So, building the proprietary technology, understanding the signaling pathways, understanding they were not tools where we can characterize these cells. So there's a lot of this has been built in-house. And being a novel industry, again, quite capex heavy. If you look into the bioreactors, which are typically used more for producing your vaccines, it's different. So people are not going to be paying the price for that when it comes to capex there. So there should be food grade bioreactors that comes in. So there should be innovation that's happening parallelly. Ancillary industries have to come together, innovate at the same rapid speed that you innovate. So I fondly remember the founders telling me when they started off in Singapore, they had to go to an island, take a ferry, because we didn't have a lab space. So find out how we can go isolate the stem cells, cut open them, see if we have tools to characterize them. I think these were some of the challenges, and also from a business and a sustainability angle, like we not only the meats we produce as part of a production process, which we call the nutrient broth that we say, we also use them, which is really discarded as the end of the use of the process. But we found that there's a lot of it can be used as a seasoning, and therefore it's more of a recycling that we do. So understanding the technology challenges, of course, the other big challenge I would say is about making consumers understand about novel technologies. How are you going to bring it to the market? So I think these are some of the challenges and risks that we had.
Good, and these are important ones. So it's costs, it's upfront investments you have to do, fundamental research into the new space, circular economy aspects from really reusing different side products from your value chain, and last but not least, and convincing consumers that this is really a better option, which it definitely could be, seeing all the positive environmental impact, but also impact on health. So I just want to give a quick reminder to the audience that you can ask questions. So if you have questions, please use the chat function and write us the questions, and then we will pass them on to Durga. Thank you. So having a bit a broader look at the industry, based on your expertise, what trends do you see in the food industry, and of course, how you fit into those trends?
Yeah, I think the food industry has really witnessed a healthy growth over the last couple of years. And I think the food industry has moved more from an imitation to an innovation side of things. And there's a great understanding of food components at the molecular level. And you can see this across various groups: vegans, vegetarians, flexitarians, omnivores. So there's a lot of understanding at the molecular level. And if you look into alternate proteins like plant-based, cultivated, insect-based, fermentation-based, I think they are the sustainable future food that not only provide us global climate change issues, but also the protein demand. So that's an important aspect that we need to address. There are a lot of places where there's malnutrition, there's not enough protein demand. So through these technologies, we can address not only climate change, but also hunger and nutrition, which is important.
So not only produce, but also bring it to where it's needed, actually.
Yeah. And from the operation standpoint, you see a number of players in the food or restaurant chains who are going cashless. And therefore, this brings about a lot of not great difficulties in handling errors and bringing greater transparency and liquidity. So at the end of the day, or the bottom line, I think it's very important to connect with consumers more on values and ethics, because they look beyond the product, not only the product. And therefore, now it's important, it's become really important, increasingly important for businesses to demonstrate this commitment to their mission and vision to their consumers.
Okay, good. So let me ask another question about consumers and their understanding, because very often when you come with a new technology and a new product that maybe doesn't look exactly the same like the established one, it takes a lot to convince consumers understanding, and coming just with price or just with health aspects has not proven to be a good recipe for really getting fast traction in the industry. So when you look from your very, I would say, complex story to tell with all the new components that you have included in your technology and your go-to-market approach, and also from a pricing perspective, I understand there are some challenges. What are your takeaways? How could you make the cultured seafood the preferred choice for consumers like you and me?
That's a great question. We spoke about technology. I think the demand in consumer is a very important aspect to address. And I'm going to back it up with some data. So we did some studies in-house to understand about consumer perceptions of meat and cultivated, specifically cultivated meat and seafood. And we had more than 60% of Singapore consumers who were saying they're willing to try cultivated meat and seafood. But then there was a 40% who said, we have not heard this term, we don't know about it. But there again, when we showed them an infographic, which was a simple analogy that I explained to you about how cultivated meat and seafood is produced, more than 50% of the people who said they don't know about it, they were willing to try and even pay a premium. Now, a similar study was done few months later in Hong Kong with the same data set, which in fact more respondents. There were 95% of consumers who said we're willing to try cultivated meat and seafood. And the biggest motivation in Singapore was sustainability. They want to try novel foods. But in Hong Kong, a few months later, they said health and security as the major positive driver for them to try cultivated meat and seafood. Now, this has to go back and say, because COVID-19 is a classic example again to prove to us that all infectious diseases, dangerous bacteria come to us from the animals that we eat. And therefore, people are willing to try cultivated meat and seafood and even pay a premium. In terms of shrimp, let me tell you, for a kilogram of shrimp that you go and buy from the supermarkets, you don't know where it comes from, how it's produced. There's not a lot of information about the traceability.
True.
And the amount that you pay is not for the meat. There's a lot amount of other waste that is being discarded, like you're not using. But what we produce through the technology is just meats. It's just the meat that you consume. So there's no waste that's generated, not the head, the legs, or the other parts that are being produced. And you're paying price for 100 kilogram or what kilogram of meat that you buy. So if you do comparison, it's at a premium during the early stages. But when it reaches mass commercialization, it'd be in a few years at cost parity with the convention, sometimes even cheaper than that, if you add the environmental and other costs to it.
This will then also be the tipping point when you have basically a wider adoption also for retail and any non-premium applications for your product. Very interesting, and particularly this balance between environment and health aspects and how it's perceived differently in different markets, and even markets that are so close like Hong Kong or Singapore. That's very interesting. Good. So we got a question from the audience by Stefan Migo, and Stefan is asking, the company mentions meat in its name. But do I get it right that you are producing strictly seafood, crustaceans, meat, and not mammal meat such as beef?
Yeah,
and so
that's a great question. Yeah, we produce crustacean, and we've also acquired another company which does meat and pork. It's called Gaia Foods, and therefore we produce both meat and seafood.
Very interesting, good. And then you started first with crustacean, and then you added.
We acquired another company which specifically focuses on beef and pork, and we believe that there shouldn't be duplication of a lot of resources. We don't have to go back to identify what to do for beef, and the synergy is very important, and that's the reason we acquired that company, and we do meat, seafood, beef, and pork.
Good. So you cover the full
yeah.
spectrum.
It's more of a technology platform.
Very good. So we get another question from Susanne Raver-Renevy. Susanne, merci for your question. Good afternoon. You have recently entered a partnership with Swiss Mirai Foods. That rings a bell, that name. What does it mean for your development?
As I mentioned earlier, this industry is, consolidation is very important. And therefore, we have to work with each other, with different players, so that you don't reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's very crucial to have meaningful partnerships and collaborations in order to bring meat and seafood within the different markets. So there's a lot of exchange information sharing between the company in what we develop. And that's crucial to penetrate the markets.
Yeah, and also to build up talent that can really bring the industry and the products forward.
You shouldn't duplicate the resources.
So if I understand correctly, what you are doing reminds me a bit to the earlier days in biotechnology, when you had also those clusters emerging in different spots, of course, with Switzerland, a good example, but also Singapore with the biotech development here. And it seems to me that in the cell-based meat, it goes in a very similar way but with earlier global networks that, of course, can then help to attract talent also from other markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Singapore being the first country to come up with the regulatory framework, there's a lot of knowledge sharing and information on both aspects, on what it means to each jurisdiction. What does it mean in Switzerland? Like, we also have recently formed an APAC consortium, which is basically it's a non-profit where all the cultivated meat companies come together to see how we can harmonize the frameworks and regulations. What is the common terminology that's used? Lab-grown, cultivated. There's different naming that's there. So the industry is more moving towards harmonization.
Good. And I think also from lab-grown to cell-based, and it's a question of what's the scale, because everything starts sort of in a lab, also plant-based, and then you move on into scaling and having an industrial plant. So I think this will look then very similar to what we see in biotech with the bioreactor structures, and of course the expertise in scaling up those volumes while still keeping the quality and the output, right? Yeah,
quality throughout. Like, upstream is more from biomedical engineering, but when you go down, it's a food product.
Yep.
So how do you have that balance of even developing your plants, which has to take principles from both industry? It's a marriage between tissue engineering and food industry. How do you bridge the gap? And at the end of the day, it's for a food product. The consumers are paying for a food product, and it's not the injectables or the vaccines.
Yeah. Very, very insightful. Good. Let me have a look at questions. So maybe let me ask one more thing about technology in general, because we read some very innovative new approaches, how you can bring structure to cell-based, and you have then use cases like wrapping them around other materials, 3D printing. I have recently read something about using 3D printers to create structures, and how do those efforts that are probably stepwise, they follow after you have already cultured the cells and then you form them? So how do they fit together with your overall value chain that you're offering as Shiok Meats?
Yeah, right now what we focus is more on the minced meat that we have as the first product that we'll have it in the market. But this cultivated meat, being a novel industry, it's seen a number of technical breakthroughs in terms of adaptation of what equipment you use to 3D printing. At Shiok, we focus on introduction of technology on the R&D and scale it up through the use of high throughput bioreactors, automation by process controls using biomass probes as well as cell counters, because our cells are quite small when compared to mammals.
Yeah.
So these are the different technologies that we use. When it comes to 3D printing, it's more for producing the structured meat, which will give you the bite, which will give you, right now, there are a lot, but you have to see the economies of the 3D printing is again another expensive technology. Yeah. So how do we bridge the gap and bring a structured product?
And most importantly, they will always need your cells, because you basically provide the base, and then you still decide what budget do you have and what technology is available for forming them into the end product that you target. Very interesting. Good. So I think we are coming almost to the end of our today's webinar. Let me ask you here at the end also some more personal question. Can you tell us a bit more about you? What is driving you? I mean, I see you showing up so often in social media and being so active, traveling across the globe. What is driving you, and what are you doing when you're not in Shiok Meats trying to scale your wonderful business model and can spend some spare time?
Sure. I think it's been an incredible journey over the last 4 years when I joined mission-driven founders to build the future of food. Prior to Shiok, I worked with a research institute focusing on metabolic diseases and infectious diseases. And I think having a background both in R&D and business has enabled me to build meaningful collaborations, partnerships within the industry to drive the innovation funnel, because it's all about innovation at the end of the day. And of course, to do all of this, it's important to build a stellar team who's really passionate about what they're doing. And I think I'm really glad that I'm able to lead by an example by working in such an organization. And I think my daughters can learn from me, from what we do. Apart from that, I think when I'm not at work at Shiok, then I would say I'm a fitness enthusiast and I'm a trained yoga professional. So that's what I do.
So you can always keep the balance then with your heavy workload and still keep the private life stable. That's great. And health, of course, would then also be for you a very important topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a combination, and you find your ikigai.
Very true. Well, with this, we have come to an end of today's webinar. I want to thank you, Durga, for coming here, taking your time and sharing all those insights. I really learned a lot today from your first-hand insights from the cell-based seafood industry. Thank you so much. A big thank you also to the audience for your active participation and the good questions asked. And last but not least, the STARS team in Switzerland, Tony, Patricia, thank you so much for facilitating these webinars and also the kind intro. Please look out for our next upcoming webinar that we will have on novel food technologies, which will be in early February next year. And there we will bring in another facet of these novel food technologies that we try to cover with our webinar series. Thank you all for your participation, and we wish you a wonderful weekend ahead.